So this is the third really crappy tripod that I've owned since making these videos, and it's just about dead. I need to either buy another one or make something different. Now, if I buy another one, I don't want to buy another cheap one, and I just can't seem to spend $200 or $300 on a tripod that I know is going to last. So instead, I'm going to make something for a lot less money that I think will be better in the long run. So this one is really falling apart. I've got a spring clamp holding this leg together, and all three of the bottom sections for each one of the legs is held in place with some blue painter's tape because they just can't hold themselves up anymore. So my objectives with the newer one are to make something that is easier to adjust the height. Because I've got so much crap going on, I have to adjust the middle one on this one, and each one of these you open and tighten, open, move, and then tighten. So that's 3 processes plus the center adjustment to fine tune where you need to be. And if you do that 20-30 times per week multiplied by 52 weeks in a year, that adds up. So instead of having a 4-stage process for adjusting the height, I would like to be able to adjust the height of something new with one motion. The second thing is it needs to be more sturdy than this. This is very easy to tip over. It doesn't take much effort at all to tip this over. So if it is harder to tip than this, which isn't saying much, and that's all I'm looking for with the new one. And then lastly, this only goes up and down, and I've never been able to like go over something easily. So if I could add a little bit of like an articulating arm, that would be cool. But I don't want to go crazy with it because I don't want to have to counterbalance it on the other side and have to figure out all that. So that's my requirements for something new. Oh, and it also has to be cheap and easy to make. For a long time, I've had the idea to use 1/2-inch iron pipe into a concrete bucket, and however long the pipe was, to have some attachments off of it. After some experimenting, 1/2-inch pipe is just too flimsy for this application. I was going with it because it's cheap and readily available. Instead, I'm going to use a thicker fence post and still use the bucket in concrete. And then on the bottom of the bucket have a frame that goes around it with 4 casters mounted to the bottom of it, and then have the bucket elevated by 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch, something like that, to not bottom out as it's rolled around in the shop. So the reason for this particular setup instead of something similar like Jeremy Schmidt did in his video, if you haven't seen his camera stand, I'll post a link to it in the end card for this video. But what he did is made a wider, shallower, low profile platform for all of the weight to go into, which honestly is probably better in an overall sense for a camera stand. But I think using the bucket approach will allow me to, number one, have a little bit smaller of a footprint while still being stable enough to use. And then also, number two, make something that is easy for other people to make who are in the audio, or not audio, the video and photography world, to where that the stand might be of interest to them, but they don't need a shop full of tools or something like that to accomplish it. So a simple frame, a simple bucket, concrete, and a fence pole. For the frame, we need 2 pieces at 10 1/4 of an inch, 4 pieces at 13 1/4 of an inch, and 2 pieces at 16 1/4 of an inch. For the frame, I'm using 2.5-inch screws, and I'll start with the shortest pieces, working my way around, getting longer. All right, so before the final layer of the frame, I want to attach the bucket. And I know that my casters have a height of 2.5 inches, and I want this to be, let's just go with 3/4 of an inch off the ground. So 2.5 minus 3/4 is 1 3/4 of an inch. So if I slide this down, it's slightly compressing the bucket, which is fine. But if I slide this down so that there is 1 3/4 of an inch between the frame and the lip of the bucket all the way around, then that should put the bucket at the appropriate height to allow for 3/4 of an inch of ground clearance once the casters are installed. Now, to secure the bucket to the frame, I'm just going to screw through the sides in the middle into the bucket. Now, these are 2.5 inch screws, so they should stick through the bucket by about 1 inch, and that will be plenty enough for the concrete to grab a hold of and prevent the concrete from ever wanting to spin inside the bucket. And it'll also securely attach the concrete also to the perimeter frame. Now I can finish out the rest of the wooden frame. I've got 3 of the forecasters mounted, and I thought I'd point something out really quick. Number 1, the frame. I staggered the joints to make it a little bit stronger, rather than having 2 pieces secured to one another attached to 2 pieces secured to one another with one long continuous butt joint here. Staggering the joints and seams makes it a little bit more structurally sturdy. Also, before I attached the casters, it's worth noting that last night I sprayed the ball bearing swivel area in the inside with a PTFE dry lube spray that is dirt and dust resistant, and every time I've done this to casters before installation, it results in a object that is really easy to swivel and move around here in the shop. Everyone that I haven't done this to has had some frustrations in that regard. But anyway, I'll attach these to the bottom of the frame on the furthest point away from the center with some 1 inch washer head screws. All right, I've got the pole in the dry bucket elevated on a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, and I need to make a mark, so I put a Sharpie in a pipe clamp that is a little bit lower than the garage door rails. And I need to cut it off right there, so that way when the garage door is open, it won't knock everything over, because that would suck. I drilled a hole and put a bolt through the pole to give the concrete something to bite a hold of and prevent the pipe from spinning around inside the concrete, maybe a year down the road. The bag on the concrete says that about 3 quarts of water is necessary for this mix, so I'll slowly add some of the dry concrete with water and mix up a little bit as I go. I can't mix this entire bag at one time. And then I'll add the post and continually working as I check to make sure that the post is nice and plumb. I've got all my pieces cut for the bracket that will go up and down the pipe, and it starts with 1 piece of plywood on one side, then 2 pieces of hardwood on this back side where the articulating arm will eventually mount to. And then we can use the offcut from the pipe as a spacer, and then the locking side over here. And then in order to lock all this together, I put a T-nut below the surface and then have a screw handle on this side. And this is just a carriage bolt going through a block of wood, and this is all locked together nice and tight. And then as you advance the thread, as you advance the screw, it pushes onto the pipe, which locks the pipe into this piece. And from my experiments, this does not require a ton of force, so this should do the job just fine, and I'm not worried about digging into the pipe at all. So once all these are in place, then I can cap everything off with another piece of plywood on the top. I'll go ahead and put glue in all these joints and use some brad nails to tack everything together, while I then reinforce everything with some screws. All right, to test the screw, let's see. I was about a half of a turn after I felt it getting tight. And that's more pressure than what this thing will ever see. Ooh, it's quick to release too. All right, that's what I was looking for. Very little effort to tighten this thing down. And then also, no visible damage on the pipe either. Good deal. All right, so now to the arm. If I were to attach the camera with just one arm, then every time I change the angle, I lose my vertical position with the camera. I'll have to bring it back to a vertical orientation every single time. So to prevent that extra step, I'm going to use two arms and make this a parallelogram so that every time the camera is adjusted, it is still vertical. Like so. All this means is these two have to have holes drilled in them at the exact same location, and then the two corresponding holes in this arm need to be drilled in the exact location on this piece. So I'll stack both of these items and drill the holes as needed. I secured the pieces together through the first hole with a screw and then drilled the second hole with a smaller diameter bit for the pilot hole. Now on the main body only, not this other arm, I need to drill a much larger hole for the carriage bolt, which is where the whole thing will be locked in place. Also, one of the arms needs a larger diameter hole for the carriage bolt as well. Assembly can start with the lower arm. Now all of the screws that I'm using here have no threads on the first half and then threads on the bottom half. All of the pivot movement will be on the side that doesn't have any threads, so I'm not worried about these being chewed up or anything. And then this arm can go on the carriage bolt, and this is where all of the movement will be locked. And this is a temporary handle that I found in my hardware drawer. I want to see how much leverage is required before I actually make a decent handle. And then on this side, let's see, on the back side here, again, two more screws. So how tight these three screws are will determine a lot of how easy this is to move. Now, once I have this in place, I'll be going against gravity with the weight of my camera, so it's going to be a little bit looser than this. But once I get it to a place that I want it, then this will allow me to lock it down. And so far, that all looks good. I just need to figure out how much leverage I need here, and then also mount this bolt into this post to mount the quick release for the camera. All right, so I've been messing around with this for a little bit, trying to get everything finalized as far as what's working, what's not. The little handle, the little small handle I had on here wasn't large enough. I needed some more leverage, so I added this. And as you can see, it's loose, but still being held in place because I also added this post and a doubled up bungee cord to about the center point on this arm. And what that allows is this bungee to kind of hold it horizontal. It can still go lower if needed, but it wants to pull back up. And the reason for adding this was mainly for a safety seat belt, I guess. So if I'm up high with this thing, I got to thinking, well, what if this handle fails? Then this is just going to come crashing down. So with it up high, then right about here is where the handle starts to grab, and about a half a turn more holds it in place. So if it's up high and then this happens to fall or fail for whatever reason, then it's not going to cause damage to the camera if it comes crashing down. So this is working out very well, nice and fluid motion. You know, if I have it anywhere from here or down, then there's very little clamping force needed to hold this in place, so that's cool. Basically, I went from having to adjust 4 things on the crappy tripod to just one handle to get a tremendous range of motion with the height. And with all that said, I still have this adjustment over here to move this up and down the pole. Now, this is all the way backed out. It's not even touching the pipe, and it's holding up its own weight because gravity's pulling this down, so it's wanting to rotate everything, which means that on the right side up here, it's pushing into the pipe, and on the bottom side here, it's pushing into the pipe, so it's kind of wedging itself in place. And at that point, you can just lift up the weight of the camera, and this will slide up and down. However, I'm not going to trust that. I can still just finger tighten this down, and it's not going to go anywhere. And of course, the base moves around very easily, which I'm quite pleased with. So overall, this is a huge win for me. The only downside is there's 4 contact points with the ground, so at some points there is a little bit of unevenness on the floor. However, it's going to settle itself out if I just leave it alone. So very pleased with this, and I should have done it sooner because it's going to make my life here in the shop just a little bit easier. So now to put the actual new camera on it. All right, that's it for real this time. You guys be sure to check out these next couple links on the screen for similar items to this. You guys take care and have a good day. Whoa, I need more room.